Hi there. I know, it's been a minute, but welcome back to reading every X-Men comic ever. The series where I read, recap, and rank every X-Men comic ever. It's gonna make sense why I've been gone for like 3 weeks, because this week I'm covering the entirety of classic X-Men. If you haven't heard of this actual comic run and think I'm just talking about classic X-Men comics in general, I don't blame you. This is primarily a reprint run. It started in 1986 and ran for 45 issues, reprinting the X Men issues from 1975 through 1980, which would be Giant Size X Men, all the way through to X Men 139. However, it does skip issues 106 and 110, which is kind of weird, but those two also don't really matter in the grand scheme of things, so it's not that big of a loss. Now, as you may suspect, if that's all this run was, I would not be here covering it, and we'd probably be 3 weeks ahead. But it isn't. Every single issue of Classic X-Men, minus the last one, includes a brand new secondary story, and most of them actually have new material within the main reprinted stories themselves. These secondary stories are all canon to the main Marvel timeline, and the contents of which are usually tied to the main story in some way. Not always, but most of the time. They usually have the main character be someone of importance from the reprinted story, and some of them even tie in directly to that main story, either acting as some sort of prologue or epilogue, or sometimes even just something in between the pages or panels. The new material in these reprints usually just gives us more character moments and foreshadowing, but sometimes it also provides further context for the events that have happened in the story, or are about to happen, or will happen in the future. All of which is pretty cool, honestly. I figure the best way to go about this series is to just go issue by issue and discuss everything they changed or added. While I am aware that means that you watching probably won't go and read this book, you probably weren't going to anyway because it's primarily reprints. Even if you haven't read any of these reprinted issues before, I honestly still wouldn't recommend starting with Classic X-Men as your way in, if only because this series is hard to find. It has never been collected physically in its entirety. Only issues 2 through 25 have been collected at all in the two X-Men vignette books, but even those are just the secondary stories. On top of that, Marvel Unlimited, which is where I read this book, does not include the reprinted stories for those issues that don't have any added material to them. And in multiple cases, they have the added material and the secondary story, but not the main reprinted story itself, so the added stuff is just out of context. Hell, they even edit the credits pages at the beginning to remove reference from the reprinted stories. I just don't think it's worth the trouble to go looking for these as your introduction to this era of X-Men just because of some bonus content that, while canon, is not really necessary for a first read. All that said, strap in, because this is going to be a long one. Probably my longest one yet, if this script is anything to go by. And it'll probably be a bit more informational than entertaining, but I'll try my best. Classic X-Men number 1. Reprints, Giant Size X-Men. This first issue actually has some of the biggest changes to an existing issue, and I think it's the only one where it doesn't separate the reprinted story from the new story. It is technically one whole brand new story that just so happens to use pages, and it's set around the events of Giant Size X-Men. The first 4 pages are all new, expanding on Cyclops returning home from Krakoa without the other X-Men, and it also reveals that Charles has been aware of the mutants that will become the new X-Men for a while. This leads to Chuck gathering all the mutants, which is exactly the same as the original issue, but then condenses the planning, rescue, and fight of Krakoa into 2 pages. Everything after that is all new, and it details the events of what happened during the first night at Xavier's mansion with both teams. It gives us the reasons as to why Bobby, Warren, Jean, Laura, and Alex all leave, as well as establishing Warren's dislike of Logan, and Logan and Jean's attraction to each other. I think this is a fascinating issue, and also proves my point that this is not a good jumping on point for new readers. While you do get the basic story of Giant Size X-Men, it is pretty condensed. You don't get a lot of the character moments, especially for these new characters like Storm and Thunderbird and Nightcrawler. That said, however, I do think this is a great pairing if you've already read Giant Size X-Men or you are about to either read or reread Giant Size X-Men. Reading this not necessarily alongside, but maybe afterwards, I think would be really cool. Classic X-Men number 2. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 94. Here we have an extended Danger Room training sequence on pages 8 and 9, and on pages 11 through 13, we have Cyclops talking with Chuck about leading the new X-Men. Rain and Moira ride a horse, Moira gets summoned to Xavier's, and Storm saves Thunderbird. The secondary story gives us context for Storm and Jean's friendship as they go on a shopping trip, but things get heated thanks to Jean's telepathy, and we get the first chronological appearance of Storm's claustrophobia. Classic X-Men number 3. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 95. We start with a new conversation between Count Nefaria and the Animan on pages 3 and 4, and we get a new scene inserted between the old panels that explains that Nightcrawler can't teleport anywhere he can't see or visualize. So Banshee uses sonar on the mountain to find him a place to go. This establishes this quirk of his mutant power that was introduced later. Finally, we get Thunderbird snapping at Cyclops and pondering his place on the team right before his inevitable demise. This moves us directly into the secondary story, appropriately titled Mourning, where the team mourns their fallen teammate while looking for his body that was stolen. However, it was taken by his younger brother, who is giving Thunderbird a proper native send-off. It also gives us a look into John's life pre-X-Men and more of his short time on the X-Men, which is nice because he really was only in 3 issues. We also weirdly get reference to Jean's origin here, which is not where I expected to find it, and also something that hasn't been addressed up to this point. Classic X-Men number 4. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 96. There's not a lot new here, just 2 pages, 10 and 11, where Storm swims naked to the surprise of the rest of the team, and Moira and Chuck converse about their past and their present. The second story has Wolverine dare Kurt to go on a walk through town without his image inducer active. This is the first chronological appearance of Nightcrawler's image inducer. It was actually first introduced in X-Men issue 97. Speaking of, Classic X-Men number 5. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, issue 97. The new stuff here is oddly Alex Summers focused, with him reflecting on his life compared to his brothers on page 6, and him breaking free of Eric the Red's control when Scott is hurt on page 12. On that same page, we also get Scott thinking back to when he came up with the Eric moniker to save Lorna, which is about as new reader-friendly as this book gets. The secondary story has Colossus save a young Russian woman's life, and they bond, but his mutant powers end up cutting the relationship short, which is a real shame because, man, it would have been nice for Colossus to have a serious relationship with someone that wasn't a 14-year-old. Classic X-Men number 6. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, issue 98. This is obviously the second return of the Sentinels, and we get to see how Banshee and Wolverine lost their fight to the Sentinels on page 8, as well as Colossus and Nightcrawler on a double date, interrupted by Moira, who has told them what's happened. We also get more bullshit with Shaw and the Hellfire Club on pages 14 and 15. The secondary story is a no-text story that has Jean getting ready for a date with Scott. This leads directly into the main story. It has some good foreshadowing about what happens to Jean. I love a no-text story, and this is a really, really great one. Classic X-Men number 7. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 99. Page 4 has the X-Men get ready for space travel. Page 10 has Shaw and some guy named Ned discuss Lang's Sentinel program, and most of page 18 to panel 1 on page 19 sees the X-Men break Banshee and Wolverine free. In the backup story, we get Shaw discovering that his friend and current leader of the Hellfire Club, Ned, plans on killing all mutants, including himself, so he kills Ned first. Rest in peace, Ned, I guess. This was not a story I necessarily needed, but it was good nonetheless, and it gives us our first chronological appearances of Tessa, Emma, and Leland. Classic X-Men number 8. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, issue 100. The only new content here expands on Lang's death and the rescue of Cyclops' group, which constitutes most of page 14 and the top half of page 15. The really good stuff from this issue comes from the backup story, where as she pilots the Doom shuttle back to Earth, Jean's final thoughts and wishes for life summon the Phoenix Force, with which she makes a deal. I knew this detailed explanation of the Phoenix origin would show up eventually. I did not expect it here, but I loved it here. It's easily one of my favorite stories in this series. Classic X-Men number 9. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 101. Once again, not a lot of new here, just pages 7, 8, and 9, which have Corbo covering the X-Men's escape and the X-Men getting Jean to a hospital. The secondary story takes place at the hospital while they're waiting for Jean to awaken. Nightcrawler befriends a young boy named Daniel, only for him to not be as real as he seems and is dead in the morning. It's fun, kinda weird, pretty standard, he was the ghost the whole time type of story. Classic X-Men number 10, reprints X-Men Volume 1, number 102. Issue 10 here was the first time I noticed that the recap header on the first page was changed. This does happen in later issues as well, and it might have happened in earlier issues and I just didn't notice. When these are updated, they really don't have any new information, it's just a rewritten recap of the previous issue. As for actual new content, we have an expanded version of Storm's origin throughout pages 8, 9, and 11, and more of Chuck's Lalandra visions, with more of a focus on the toll it has on him. For the secondary story, Logan wanders New York City, but is being chased and led on by an old rival, who he can't seem to catch. This old rival is actually Sabretooth, who actually started as a villain for Iron Fist of all characters. While this isn't his first appearance in an X-Men book, X Factor 10 released about 7 months prior to this issue, it is at least his first appearance in this show. Somehow, Sabretooth is not the only big X-Men villain whose first appearance in this series is this episode, but I'll get to that later. Classic X-Men number 11, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 103. This issue has a bunch of changes, including a full recap of the last issue on pages 3 and 4. The original issue's page 4 has been removed, which was the page that established that Nightcrawler disappears in the dark, and any other important info from that page was condensed into a single panel at the top of page 6. Page 7, panels 5 and 6, and page 8, panels 1 through 4 detail another mental breakdown by Chuck due to Lalandra's connections, and the X-Men's current predicament. Page 15 explains where the Storm and the guns came from during the final battle. In the backup, Storm befriends a depressed writer who is unsure living is his right path, but when a killer attacks Storm, he decides to help and have hope. Classic X-Men number 12. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 104. Pages 4 through 6 go into more detail on the X-Men's boat crash and gives reference to Magneto and the Chuck's connection, as well as more insight into Magneto as a character. On that topic, the secondary story gives us a fully detailed Magneto backstory, from his time in Auschwitz all the way to the death of his daughter in a fire at the hands of commies. Back in the present, he saves a mother and child from that same fate. Well, the fire part. There are no commies present involved this time, at least as far as we know. Classic X-Men number 13. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 105. Pages 2 and 3, plus the top third of page 4, fill in the gap between this issue and the last, as well as give more context for Eric the Red's plan and Alandra's mission. And on page 7, we get an expansion on the Fire Lord X-Men fight. Meanwhile, in the backup, we have a beach trip with Misty, Colleen, Danny, and Jean, where Jean wonders what she really is and how to cope with it. And she also saves a family of dolphins from a shark. Classic X-Men number 14, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 107. Page 3 has a new recap of the end of the last issue, and also gives us small character moments for all the characters. Then on page 14, we get a proper introduction to all the Starjammers. This secondary story is honestly one of my favorites, as it details Lalandra's escape from her brother, and how she and Chuck get mentally intertwined. I've always been curious about how their connection started, because Lalandra doesn't have any mental powers, and these visions just kind of start randomly. But connecting them to the Psychic Blast Charles released into space at the end of X-Men 65 is kind of brilliant, but also painfully obvious in retrospect, to the point that I feel stupid for not making that connection sooner, but still very cool. Plus X-Men number 15, reprints X-Men Volume 1, number 108. Page 16, panels 4 through 5, have a look into Jean's psyche in the moment she decides to save existence, and also Corsair's reaction to finding out Scott is his son. On the next page, we have a bunch of reordered panels, and a new one as the Phoenix begins to rise, continuing into the brand new content on pages 18 through 20. This goes into even further detail on Phoenix saving existence, and even the first tease of Dark Phoenix, which is super cool. The backup story is just the Starjammers origin story from the perspective of Corsair. It's pretty good, but nothing super special. Classic X-Men number 16, reprints X-Men Volume 1, number 109. Pages 7 through 9 give more context to Vindicator's mission and his connection with Wolverine, as well as showcasing Lilandra exploring the mansion and Earth Tech, ending with some more Chuck Lilandra action. And finally, on page 22, we get an explanation on what happened to Vindicator after the fight and how he processed what happened. The new story follows cousins Sean and Tom, Banshee and Black Tom, who are yearning for the love of the same girl. It shows a relationship between these two characters that it seems more like a friendly rivalry than what it is now, and it makes me wonder what happened to make them kind of these bitter enemies. Classic X-Men number 17, reprints X-Men Volume 1, 111. The only new stuff in this story is the beginning few pages, which give us a full condensed history of Beast's backstory, as well as an expanded context as to why he's looking for the X-Men. The backup story, meanwhile, just explains how Mesmero captured all the X-Men and where he got the idea to do this carnival idea. Classic X-Men number 18, reprints X-Men Volume 1, number 112. This issue doesn't have a lot of new content, just page 3 and page 16. The former establishes everyone's thoughts on the current situation, while the latter expands on Phoenix versus Magneto. The second story has Wolverine, Banshee, and Nightcrawler hunt a runaway Jean, who is just looking for a safer place to test the limits of her powers. Classic X-Men number 19, reprints X-Men Volume 1, number 113. I'll be honest, I was a little disappointed with this one. I was hoping that it would actually give us an answer as to how the X-Men escaped their captivity, but it does not. Instead, we get more of their thoughts on the matter on page 6, and more Magneto characterization on pages 10 and 11. We get even more Magneto characterization in the secondary story, where Magneto hunts Nazis for a secret organization, but said organization turns out to be working with Nazis after he captures the wrong one. So he turns on said organization, and this is ultimately the push he needed to be fully evil. Classic X-Men number 20, reprints X-Men Volume 1, 114. Pages 7 and 8 detail how the X-Men escaped the lava. Page 13 confirms Jean tried to side-scan for the team and further establishes the block to long-range telepathic communication by Magneto. Page 18 sees Scott dealing with the loss of Jean, or, well, his lack of dealing with it, because he doesn't feel anything. In story 2, Storm is on a solo vacation only to find out about the dangers of a nearby factory and the man who owns it. It's kind of trippy and weird. Classic X-Men number 21, reprints X-Men Volume 1, number 115. The only changes here are pages 11 through 13, which see Jean mourning Scott and then losing control of her telepathy yet again. Meanwhile, the secondary story in the Savage Land, Colossus gets down after saving some local women from a T-Rex. Classic X-Men number 22, reprints X-Men Volume 1, number 116. Aside from some new opening paragraphs, the only actual new stuff is on pages 7 and 8, which better establishes the threat of the situation Storm, Wolverine, and Nightcrawler find themselves in. After this, we get a solo adventure with Storm that takes place before the X-Men take off into the Antarctic Ocean, where she saves a woman from a dinosaur in a lake. Said lake is actually a portal to another dimension, in which Storm thrives, but knows she cannot stay. Classic X-Men number 23, reprints X-Men Volume 1, number 117. The only new content here is on page 19, where we get more of Wolverine's romantic thoughts on Jean and his current thoughts on Scott, having noticed that Scott isn't really mourning her like he should be. Moving on to the backup, where after being rescued, Nightcrawler saves a woman from going overboard, but the pair wash up on an island where Nightcrawler gets to have a swashbuckling adventure and save the woman from cultists. Classic X-Men number 24, reprints X-Men Volume 1, number 118. There isn't really anything new in this book that relates to the main story, however we do get an interlude on page 7 of Jean trapped in Greece. This actually relates to the secondary story, where Jean, who is on vacation around Europe before she heads to Muir Isle, actually gets her bag and all her belongings stolen, so she accepts the help of a local man. This local man is actually Mastermind, who has planned this whole scheme, and it establishes a much longer timeline of the manipulation of Jean Grey before Dark Phoenix. Classic X-Men number 25, reprints X-Men Volume 1, number 119. Pages 13 and 14 retcon the Moses Magnum origin, so he gets his power upgrade from Apocalypse. On page 17, the X-Men await news on the injured Banshee, and Misty asks Colleen about her relationship with Scott, which is a relationship I fully forgot about. The backup follows a hunter tracking Wolverine through a winter forest, thinking him a dumb animal. Classic X-Men number 26. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, 120. Page 4 gives Max some more character and depth regarding Wolverine and his mission, then pages 5 and 6 have Jean grappling with the death of Scott and her own resurrection. In the backup, Wolverine and Banshee each share their perspectives of the same night from the same bar 20 years ago, or either one of them knew each other. It's very fun, and it has a cute art style. Classic X-Men number 27, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 121. Like the first issue in Classic X-Men, this would probably be a good companion piece for the standard release of this issue that's being reprinted, which in this case is, of course, X-Men 121. An entire subplot revolving around the governmental ramifications of Alpha Flight's mission to capture Wolverine is added, as well as an epilogue that not only shows how Wolverine escaped, but also that the order to capture Wolverine is rescinded. Those are the only additions. However, this book removes the 3 pages of fighting between the X-Men and Alpha Flight and the 5 pages of the X-Men ending the fight by ending the snowstorm and Wolverine surrendering. So yeah, not really a good one to read for your first time going through this arc, but pretty decent companion piece probably. The second story, however, here is very weird. Logan and Jean get trapped together in a factory filled with scores of these worm-like creatures, and the entire time, Logan is just using it as an excuse to make sexual euphemisms and innuendos and get close to Jean. It's very strange. Classic X-Men number 28, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, 122. From this point forward in Classic X-Men, there are no changes or additions to the reprinted stories. They're just straight reprints. So because of that, I'm only going to be covering the secondary stories in each issue, seeing as that's the only new content in each book. With this one, the X-Men go to a Halloween party in disguises, which is actually a setup to catch a murderer. This is a pretty fun one, and I enjoyed going back through to spot the X-Men in costume after they are revealed. Classic X-Men number 29, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 123. Colossus returns home for a visit, only to be labeled as a traitor by the government and forced to return to the X-Men. This is an excellent Colossus solo story, especially since we haven't seen a lot of him with his parents, or even him in his homeland. Classic X-Men number 30, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, 124. Arcade wakes from a nightmare to find a Myrtle World has been activated, with himself as the target, only for him to find out that he is the one that programmed it in his sleep. I fucking hate this guy, and I also hate that this story makes him semi-sympathetic. Kill this man! Classic X-Men number 31, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 125. Chuck has trouble coming to terms with how lacking human intelligence is in space among aliens. Until, of course, he meets the plumber. She fixes things. Classic X-Men number 32, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 126. Proteus tortures Wolverine via reality warping. It really is just that simple. This is one of the few backup stories that very clearly takes place between the panels of the main story. And it makes me wonder if this started out as an addendum to the main story, but decided to just split it off into its full-length backup after they had decided not to add anything else to these original stories. Classic X-Men number 33. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 127. Havoc has a mental breakdown multiple times over his relationship with Lorna and how they are not built to be X-Men. This man needs a therapist. Real bad. Classic X-Men number 34. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 128. A servant in the Hellfire Club realizes that it's a bad place to work. It's kind of a fascinating look at Emma and the Hellfire Club as a whole from the perspective of a worker, but I can't say I'm all that thrilled about the servant's realization by the end of this issue. Classic X-Men number 35. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 129. Kitty Pryde realizes what her mutant power is via a mental trip while she's knocked out. This is a pretty weird story, but I really like the art in it. Classic X-Men number 36. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 130. Moira deals with the loss of her son by trying to clone him until Sean stops her. It's an interesting look at grief as well as Moira and Sean's relationship, which we don't really get a lot of. Which makes sense, they're not really main characters. But still, it's nice to see. Classic X-Men number 37. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 131. Dazzler talks philosophy and choice all night with a group of friends who have never been seen before or since. I did not expect an Alice and Blair mini-stories, but I'm not mad about it. especially one set before her first appearance in X-Men and her own series. However, it is a shame that this is the first and only time we see these characters. I think they could have been pretty interesting additions in her own series, but alas, they join the rest of Dazzler's forgotten supporting cast. Classic X-Men number 38, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 132. Dazzler gets on an elevator and then gets terrorized by the attendant for a bit. This story is somehow better than a good chunk of Dazzler's own issues, especially the later ones. Classic X-Men number 39, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 133. A creep tries to introduce himself to Storm, but she blows him off, so he threatens to kill Wolverine or Colossus in retaliation, and she chooses Wolverine. I feel like this was supposed to be some type of tension between Wolverine and Storm, but it's never addressed again. It's just really odd. Classic X-Men number 40, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 134. Nightcrawler walks around town and finds a young street performer whom he takes a liking to. It's a very interestingly told story, focusing a lot more on the girl and her past rather than Kurt himself. It also implies this woman who is missing a leg is some type of mutant, maybe has enhanced balance. I don't know. Classic X-Men number 41. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 135. A 12-year-old Scott has a rough time in an orphanage and fails to save the local bully from committing suicide. Yeah, it got dark real fast. But remember earlier when I said somehow Sabretooth is not the only big X-Men villain whose first appearance in this series is this episode? Yeah, let me introduce everyone to Mr. fucking Sinister, who is posing as Nate, Scott's own friend in the orphanage, who is purposely trying to make Scott's life hell. Classic X-Men number 42, reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 136. This one continues Scott's no good, very bad stay at the orphanage, as he and those around him continue to be manipulated by Mr. Sinister, including the friendly nurse, who presumably gets threatened to comply, and the couple who almost adopt Scott, who get murdered via plane crash. The one confusing part about this is the ending where Chuck and Jean appear to Scott outside the orphanage. This isn't a dream because Charles mentions that they should make it seem like one for Scott, so I'm assuming it's just like some sort of psychic vision, but it also implies that Jean has that bird in her, even though she's only maybe like 12 or 13, since this is very obviously pre-Xavier collecting the first class. Man, I'm really gonna have to make some sort of fucking timeline or something at this point, aren't I? God damn it. Classic X-Men number 43. Reprints X-Men Volume 1, number 137. After Jean dies, she ends up on the edge of oblivion and meets a builder who explains to her that her and the Phoenix are the one and the same. I'm not gonna lie, this one got real confusing real fast for me. I don't quite understand how Jean and the Phoenix are intertwined and what it means. We did get more of Jean's origin story, in which she apparently saves Chuck at some point and is psychically bonded to her dying best friend. I'm sure we'll get more details of this in X Factor, but it's neat to see here at least. Classic X-Men number 44. Reprints, X-Men Volume 1, number 138. Our final story of the video follows a young Rogue who kisses a boy and discovers how traumatic her mutant abilities are. I think this is our first chronological appearance of Rogue, and our first glimpse at what is ostensibly her origin, as well as her life growing up with Mystique and Destiny. Ugh. With that, we're all done. That's all of Classic X-Men covered, except for issue 45, but like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it's just a straight reprint of X-Men 139. There is no extra story or extra content or anything like that. This reprint line did actually continue for another 65 issues, but it's rebranded as X-Men Classic, with the numbering picking up where Classic X-Men left off. This one is purely reprints, so I'm not covering it in the series at all, but it will be added to the completed series rankings. It reprinted X-Men 140 and then Uncanny X-Men 143 through 206. For some reason, they skipped the Days of Future Past arc, which was X-Men 141 and Uncanny X-Men 142, which I don't understand. It's a pretty good story. I don't really have much else to say here. Classic X-Men is a very strange run of comics. I think the additions to the main stories are neat, but none of them are really necessary, and the fact that they remove stuff sometimes means they aren't super friendly to new readers. The secondary stories are, for the most part, good. I mean, they never lower the score of the book, but very few actually matter to the characters or plots. Which does make sense when you think about it. You can't really have big revelations or character moments in the backup story of some random issue in a reprint run. Can you imagine if the only place Scott and Madeline's wedding was printed was in the back of a reprint of, I don't know, Wolverine Volume 1, Issue 2? Or the end of Dark Phoenix Saga was only ever printed in the back of New Mutants 32? That would be like having Sam take the Captain America mantle at the end of a mediocre show. Wait a minute. You get my point, though. It doesn't make a lot of sense for these new stories to hold a lot of weight, so most of them don't, and they're usually just some fun solo adventure of a singular X-Men. And again, that's not to say they're bad, they're just a bit inconsequential. If there was any that stood out to you as I was recapping them, go read them. You'll probably enjoy them. I personally recommend the Phoenix stories at the ends of issues 8 and 43, the Magneto stories in issues 12 and 19, the Scott Orphanage stories in issues 41 and 42, as well as the Laundra story in issue 14. On the topic of my personal taste, let's move on to the rankings. Here is the giant list of all the rankings of each individual issue of Classic X-Men. Most of these issues have the same score as the original story. They've reprinted. There are a couple here that did increase in score, but I think mainly it was going from like a 5 to a 6 or like a 6 to a 7. Nothing major. I'll do something in the edit that signifies which rankings were changed from the previous one. I'll probably change like the text color to green or something. I don't know. That's a future me problem. As for the series as a whole, Classic X-Men ends with a 7.1, putting it right above the pack of single issue 7 out of 10s. X-Men Classic, the pure reprint continuation that I just mentioned, ends with a 7.6, which is, at the time of recording, the same score as both X-Factor and Uncanny X-Men. I know this was a long one, so if you stuck around for the whole thing, I appreciate it. We should be back to normal weekly schedule next week with our next event, which is the Mutant Massacre. So subscribe to know when that one drops. If you liked the video, please hit the like button and comment down below. If you've missed any episodes, the entire playlist is in the description, so you can head over there and catch up if you feel so inclined. See you next week.